مرحبا، شكرا كتير على اللي موجودين بالقاعة. بعرف هيدي آخر جلسة.
We would like to welcome you to the last session in the forum, and we highly appreciate that you are still with us. We shall try in that session as much as we can answer a question that covers all the discussions that have been raised during the last 2 days, and also holds the main title of the forum, which is Journalism Without Boundaries, or Journalism Unbound. And the main question we would like to ask to the panelists with us today is, how can a journalist break the boundaries? Breaking is a big term. I prefer to use the term, how can we deal with the boundaries imposed on the journalists? We have a number of speakers. I am delighted to have them with us. I am going to start with Yumna Al-Sayed from Al Jazeera English, Mr. Mustafa Al-Saeed, former director of Deutsche Welle in Arabic, Mr. Asad Taha. He was a journalist and producer of the documentary film Victoria L'avenue from RSF, and Duja Dawood from Committee to Protect Journalists, CPJ. And I will start with Yumna. We are going to say that we have discussed a lot of boundaries during the last 2 days, but in this final session, we would like to focus on the experiences of each of the speakers and the panelists. We shall start with Yumna. How can a journalist live and operate under a military occupation? How can the journalist break the boundaries, and what kind of boundaries we are talking about? Are these boundaries related only to war, or there are also other types of boundaries of which the journalists suffer? These are not only the war boundaries. Wars take place every now and then, every year, every 2 years. Sometimes we have military escalations more than once. But the Palestinians live in cultural boundaries. The idea of occupation itself, the Israeli occupation of the Palestinian people and territories, put lots of boundaries on the Palestinian people, and also put boundaries on the dreams of the Palestinian people. We as Palestinian people, we do not have the luxury that we can think during summer we would like to travel to a certain country in order to spend the summer vacation, similar to any family in any country around the world. Even if we have the financial means, we cannot do that. Then the reason, because of the restrictions on our movement, travel, being a Palestinian, our children. I am a mother for 4 children, and we live in Gaza. Restrictions such as my children, for example, cannot practice some sports. For example, snorkeling or any marine sports they watch on television, or any other sports. They do not have the capability to exercise that hobby. Well, but you as a journalist, how can you deal with those boundaries? These are beyond the military boundaries. Yes, these even restrict your dreams, restrict your ambitions, and these are not only restrictions and boundaries that are currently present. It is difficult to overcome those boundaries and deep down in our souls. And this is the worst type of boundaries. But we deal with those boundaries with the idea that we need to continue to fight this occupation that is trying to eliminate the Palestinian heritage. It is trying to even eliminate the Palestinian meals, food, the Palestinian ideas, and they attribute them to them. And in order for us to uphold to our identity and protect our identity as Palestinians, we have to continue fighting in order to uphold our identity, that one day we are going to get free from those restrictions and boundaries. But we alone as Palestinians living under that seizure and living under that occupation, we cannot do that alone. You need an international support that is huge. We are going to go back to this idea to see how the human identity intersects with the journalist identity. Where is that intersection and where do they go apart? But I would like to ask Mr. Asad Taha. Mr. Asad Taha, you did work in difficult circumstances in many of the countries that are being ruled by authoritarian regimes. Your main work was not in the newsrooms with the daily news, but it is to produce documentaries and some kind of in-depth journalism, if we can call it. Now, in that framework, how can a journalist deal with the boundaries and restrictions that are being imposed? Do I have 30 minutes in order to speak? No, you only have 4 minutes. What I would like to say, like I have mentioned at the end, is that we are not requested to break the boundaries, because this is almost impossible, and we are going to get face to face with certain regimes. But how we can go around those boundaries in order to be able to convey our message to the various audience. As a matter of fact, this is the hidden narrative, the stories save us from many things. On the first day, the workshop was discussing how we can transform an investigative report to a story in order to make it easier for the people to understand it, and in order to break the numbers and figures and how we can make it a story. Now we get into another phase, which is a story in an authoritarian regime, or a regime that imposes different restrictions on media and journalists. We need to resort to human stories, and the human stories are not the only one. The way we do tell that story must be in line to certain conditions or certain criteria. Yes, we are presenting facts, but we need to present different points of view, even those points of view that do not agree with us. And we need to fulfill different conditions in our stories. How, for example, we can write a story, how we can make it interesting, how we can make it attractive, etc., etc. All the conditions for developing any story. But what is important is to present different points of view, and as much as possible, we need to get away that we are the storytellers. Why do we say that? Because we do not want the work to represent us, and that this is a position against the authority or the state. If I can not be the storyteller and I can be one of the characters of the story, this would be better. And to address a simple story of the star of the story, this is what is important. Whenever, for example, we have an important issue, sometimes we might be shy, or, for example, we try to get away from those small things. But actually, those small things are important to the reader or the listener. Now, when we hear the story about the wars, we do not know the daily lives of the people. These small details we hear about different general figures, but we do not hear the details. These details are the ones which I am talking about, which give a certain interest to the reader or listener. And the other issue is, and this is against my opinion and other things, is that we shouldn't be biased. We shall be objective and to present the facts as is. But if we were able to avoid expressing our opinion in that case, we try to go around the restrictions and boundaries by telling a story. That story will be told one, twice, three times. And I need to give a message to the censor that I'm not in a problem with you. And if I can alienate my personal opinion, although me, I do approve of expressing our personal opinion, but in other issues, in the other circumstances, but in certain circumstances, I am just a messenger. This is the story.
This textile should be very smart. We should weave it in a very smart way. You've done your job. Now we wait for the intelligence of our audience, and I support this. People consider the audience not to be smart. No, I respect the audience, and I believe them to be smart, and they get the message. And maybe the authority won't get this message. Sometimes we could use history. Sometimes we could use historical context. But this is where our skill would shine. It is how we continue working amidst all of these conditions. It's not that I'm making a story that is aired and that's the end of it. I want to make the story and another story and another story. So I am prolonging. I am trying to gain people's patience in order to convey a message 2 and 3. History is very important. I tend to say that this hidden narrative, as I called it, our capability to be innovative and creative. Instead of whining about the current situation, we have to use our intelligence to get around it with our innovation and creativity. I highly appreciate what you said. The getting around this. The Arabic language helps us with this because it's a deep language that carries the components of a good story. But there's a question that I want to go back to. I want to ask you this question in a few minutes. But do you believe that the authority is not aware that you're getting around it and that what you actually mean is holding them accountable indirectly? And in these situations, in your experience, what happens? But I need to go to Mr. Mustafa. Your experience in leading newsrooms. There are limitations in many newsrooms, political boundaries. There are policies in newsrooms that limits the work of a journalist. How can a journalist deal with those boundaries in the newsroom, and what are the general responsibilities of newsrooms in breaking some of the boundaries adopted by the owners of those media platforms? Thank you for this question. You started with breaking boundaries, and And you said that we need a different approach. Let me use the term of expanding the margin. The margin is limited, but I will try to expand it. Breaking boundaries needs constitutional and legal approaches. But what we do as journalists is to expand this margin in our honest coverage of issues. Let me use a football term. You never walk alone. This is a very beautiful concept. It's used by a football club in the UK. It motivates the players, and I believe that the brief answer to the question of breaking boundaries, we have it in this forum. If you look at our agenda from the beginning till the end, it has everything that could be in the service of journalists, be training and the workshops that we had in these sessions that provide us with the information and the great opportunity of networking. This is generally what we need to empower journalists to work in an environment of solidarity. In newsrooms, I was speaking this afternoon with Mr. Mark Hunter. We spoke about the role of the editor, and he said a sentence that I really liked. He said that there are more investigators than editors who deal with investigative journalism. So there is a shortage of newsrooms that are interested in investigative journalism. There are some investigative units and some organizations and some platforms, but most of them, they distance themselves from investigative work. In my view, I believe that newsrooms that adopt investigative journalism and it takes, they have to provide some components for investigative journalists. They have to provide them with training and formation. Maybe if they are trained and they're ready, then they need an editor to follow up with them throughout the story, because the story could be very complicated. They could be detained. They could be held accountable. So they need someone to follow up on them. And there's also the guarantees, the professional guarantees. Their investigative work should not sabotage them as journalists, and physical and legal protection for the journalists. I was talking to one of the colleagues. I don't know if she's among us now. A newspaper commissioned her to follow up the story of the appropriation of land to a company to see why they were given those lands. She prepared her first report, but then the company went to the newspaper and they asked for the journalist to go visit them and answer some questions. She went with the driver to the company, and they hit the driver, and she managed to run away in the last minute. So this is the responsibility of the newsroom. They should have provided protection for this journalist because now they knew that the company knew the results or the consequences of the report that the journalist was preparing. So to answer your question briefly about how investigative stories could be accepted in newsrooms, it's not only about accepting investigative stories in newsrooms. How can a journalist overcome some of the boundaries that they're obliged to follow in newsrooms? The opportunities are not that broad. We have to expand the opportunities. I go back to expanding margins. What should a journalist do? The colleagues here, I advise them that when I take an investigative story to a newsroom, I should have prepared the story really well. I must have the data, the sources, the trusted, incredible sources. I should have a plan for the execution, and this is something to get around the limitations. I should have allies in the newsroom. Maybe I depend on the audience preference. Maybe the audience is wondering about the accountability. So this general temperament of the audience could support my suggestion. Of course, this differs from country to the other. The horizon of liberties also differs from a country to the other. If I take this complete story to the newsroom, then the newsroom has the obligation that it should be aware of, which is the obligation of adopting what the audience wants and to follow up on the accountability issue. If the editor worries about taking up the story, maybe they should take the decision from a higher entity. Then for me as a journalist, I could bug him, asking him every day. I could bring new data, new input that could support my story. At the end, I believe that we should be aware. Journalists work in newsrooms. We should be aware that we have an obligation, and our job is not. It does not end when we read the text of the news. We have to put the news in its context, and we need to follow up for justice and accountability. It's our obligation, and we have to stand in the face of the circumstances. A journalist must be brave. The bravery to take this investigation and to take it to its purpose and objective. I need more courage, and we need more courage. The editors should be more courageous. I believe persistence on bravery, because a part of the responsibility is that we shall not only focus on bravery, because sometimes it could take us to dangerous places. Of course, you have an experience, a broad experience in this area, but let's go after the dangers that journalists could face through these boundaries that they encounter in this world. I want to ask Victoria, as a representative of an organization, one of the roles that is to try to support and help the journalists. How does Reporters Sans Frontières, how do they support journalists?
So you just mentioned that journalists have to be brave. I think it's maybe a bit easier to be brave when you know that you have a safety net, and RSF Assistance Desk is here to provide this safety net. So what we do is that we try to assist journalists to push boundaries. We are a very small team working from Paris. There is only 4 of us covering the whole world. This year, we have supported 600 journalists over the world that were being targeted because of the information they shared. And I think it said something really worrying about press freedom in the world. And the way we support them so they can keep pushing boundaries. First, we offer money so they can pay for emergency relocation, so they can pay for lawyers, doctors, therapists, so they can sometimes replace professional equipment when they have been confiscated or even just compromised. And then, in the worst cases, when journalists are led to an extent where they have to leave their country because the threat is too high, we also guide them and support them in visa and asylum application. This is, of course, the last option for us. Our main goal is to keep journalists in their country so they can keep reporting and inform the whole world about what's going on inside. So yeah, that's it basically, and we're lucky enough to be part of a broader network, which is Journalists in Distress, which also includes my colleagues from CPJ. So this network gathers almost all organizations providing direct assistance to journalists. So when a journalist contacts RSF and we're not in a position to support them directly because we may not have the resources or because the journalist might not fit our intervention criteria, we try to connect them to someone else. We never close the door. We try to find another organization that could support them and make sure that they can keep reporting and stay journalists.
السؤال فيكتوريا هو ما بعرف قديش عدد
The question, Victoria, I do not know to the number of journalists that know the group, which is the journalist in distress. We call it مخاطر in Arabic. So how can the journalist reach RSF?
I have an email address. It's assistance@rsf.org. So you can either contact us directly through this address. It's available on our website. You can also contact our regional desk. You can also contact local organization of journalists, because we have many partners over the world and we try to be in touch as much as possible with local organization. We also have correspondents in each countries, so there are many, many ways to get to us. And there is also a website for journalists in distress, which is all the organizations that are part with contact information.
لازم أقول إنه مراسلون بلا حدود و CPJ.
I have to say that the CPJ and the Correspondents Sans Frontières are among the first to support the journalists in Gaza. Déjà, how CPJ differs from Correspondents Sans Frontières in the main title, which is the protection of the journalists. Hello, everybody. I believe that our work is similar in its ideal goal is that we want to keep the journalist in all the conditions and all the countries and in all the types of work. What is different is the approach we follow. And as a matter of fact, the work in its core is similar. We do many things that are common with us and also Reporters Without Borders. The differences are slight, but we do agree in many commonalities rather than we differ. I would like to go back to one of the things that used to be discussed regarding to CPJ, is that where are the organizations protecting the journalists with what journalists are being subjected to in Gaza or in the West Bank, or the journalists in Lebanon, in Sudan? Where is CPJ? We are everywhere, let me say. I believe that the MENA team at CPJ was overwhelmed with a lot of work this year because we were not covering only one location. Every team was covering one or two or three words in every sub-region. And today there are eyes on Gaza, but also on the West Bank, because what the Palestinian journalists are subject to is common. But also we try to focus on Sudan, which nobody is paying attention to. They are being run over with tanks. And we also have a lot of journalists that were killed in Sudan. In Tunisia now, the journalists are being arrested in large numbers. So we look at all the countries. There are countries that are given a priority because of the magnitude of crimes committed against the journalists. And those countries require from us measures that are unprecedented. Like, for example, the CPJ, for the first time, as a result of what is taking place in Gaza, we have a statement about the ceasefire, about the humanitarian situation, the capability of the Palestinian journalist to conduct his or her work. But we also focus on documentation. And here we have a lot of problems. We base our work on advocacy, whether explicit or implicit, and also, like Victoria said, on documentation. And currently, hiding the crime is continuous. In Sudan, we don't have no Arab or foreign journalists in Gaza, in West Bank, and in all the conflict areas. Even in Yemen, we are still witnessing a lot of violations against journalists, and we don't have in the freedom of press in the first place. The capability of documentation is getting more and more difficult. Now we have the martyr journalists in Palestine. The number is huge. This is the first time we are registering the number of journalists that are being killed as a result of their work. And since we started documenting it since 1992, this addresses the magnitude of the criminal acts and how they are trying to conceal their crimes. Victoria, I would like to go back to you because you have been talking about documentation. Reporters Without Borders every year produce an indicator about journalists around the world. How can you gather all the data? And do you need the journalists? For example, Duja talked that the journalists sometimes participate in documenting certain cases that can contribute in the developing of this indicator, which you do develop
I'm
every
very happy
year.
that you're asking the question because we are looking for new respondents. So to produce this index, we rely on respondents all over the world who might be journalists, who might be fixers, who might be any kind of media workers, but also researchers, anyone who's considered as an expert on the media scene. So we have this questionnaire gathering many indicators on the state of press freedom in the country. We're counting the number of violations, but we are also evaluating the change in laws, for example. And we try to add more and more respondents this year to make the index more accurate. So if there is anyone in a room who's interested in being a responder, you can reach out to me directly at the end of this session.
بعتقد انه هيدا الموضوع كمان
I believe that this is a very important issue because documentation is key. Yumna, I'm going to go back to you with a question that we spoke about it a lot, especially with the war on Gaza. How can a journalist, given the circumstances, given the events that we are witnessing in this vicious war against the Palestinian people, like the war that we're witnessing in Gaza against the people of Gaza, can a journalist separate his national and professional identity? I believe that this is possible, but maybe everyone around the world look at you and you're saying that you are a Palestinian journalist and you are telling your personal story. But I personally say, okay, fine, I am a journalist. I cannot be like Mr. Assad. Mr. Assad said that you are not the story, you are not the news. But for me, actually, I lived all of these details. This applies for me and for all other journalists in Gaza. We lived everything that everyone was living. We went through it with our families. I don't have to come out and say I didn't find bread for my kids today because there is no flour left in Gaza and my kids now are hungry. When I speak about hundreds of thousands of children who are hungry, then inside me, as Yumna, I know that I'm talking also about my own kids. Uh, there are no supplies at all in the market. There's nothing that you can buy. It's not only this person cannot buy this or the other person cannot buy it. When we say that we are being displaced, I personally was displaced 6 times with my kids. So we've been through the same. We are a part of this story. We are a part of this narrative. But this Palestinian journalist as a correspondent from Gaza, would come out and say, today I walked from the south, from the north to the south on foot with my kids and wife, or with my kids and husband, and we saw dead bodies on the ground, and we had to walk for 7 kilometers while raising our hands and waving a white flag. Although I personally, through this experience, word by word, but when I spoke about hundreds of thousands of Palestinians who went through this experience. But I spoke about the experience as a person who witnessed it, an eyewitness. I used my presence. I used being a component of the story as an eyewitness who can tell the story. I can tell it with all details and tell the story and experiences of this people because of what I went through personally, and I can vividly describe it. Maybe what you said emphasizes that the journalist's role as a witness. Maybe you know the person who treated with injustice in this war that no one spoke about enough. It is the Palestinian journalist. We always want to talk about others, what happened to them, how their houses were demolished, how how they were kicked out from their houses, how now they have injured persons in their family, how now they have victims from their families. We filmed stories with families that suffered from hunger, thirst, and the cold, and they lived in tents. But for us personally, and what happened to us and to our families, we've been through those circumstances. Nobody covered our stories. So this was unjust. Let's go to Asad. Asad, the idea of the witness. This is a story that you started with. I just want to say that why do we want to differentiate between the national identity and the professional identity? At the end of the day, the important thing is my credibility as a journalist. If I'm a journalist who's telling facts and not attributing to the enemy things that they didn't do, if we are being objective, then there is no problem with that. We are not the protagonists of the stories. We are telling the story on the news. Allow me, Yumna, to say this is what we do in the on the news. If I have a small feature that I'm presenting on the news. But as a journalist, I'm a story as well. If I'm living in an exceptional situation, it's not I'm telling my story. I am this person who went to Paris and I had fun in my day. No, I'm living in a war, and I believe that the audience they really want to know how Yumna wakes up. How does she sleep? What does she do? How does she deal with her husband, with her kids? How does she eat? How does she drink? And this is the suffering of the Palestinian people. Add to this that she has to work. How can she combine both hats? I believe that the ethical aspect is very important. That we describe the reality as it is, and we tell the truth. The credibility. The last question that you said before. There is no way for us to find magical solutions. How can we break the boundaries? We try to go around them. We try to prolong the time in which a country would kick us out or tell us just don't work here, don't cover here. But there are no magical solutions. Let me say something final, if you may. This is a sacred job. This is a sacred job. So you have to tell the truth regardless of how much it costs you. If you cannot do that, if you're gonna keep silent, in any under circumstance, you cannot lie. You cannot lie or fabricate for other purposes besides your job as a journalist. And this takes me to Mustafa and the experience of running newsrooms. What Asad and Yumna said, journalists, they also have their own personal stories. Do newspapers give the journalists the space to show their personal story as an example of what's going on? First of all, I worked with a Western channel. It mostly depends on the personal story of the journalist. How does he work? What are the boundaries? What are the limitations and difficulties? The sacrifices of the journalist. It's taken. It's not. He's not showing off, but they're actually telling their personal story. And Arab channels and Arab media outlets should adopt it. It's not about Yumna as a person, but Yumna represents a huge crowd of people. And I want to tell Yumna that there are a lot of people who are compassionate with the journalists who suffered or who died in Gaza. You are not alone. And you are not alone. We are in this confrontation, but there is a point that was mentioned, which is not being biased. In newsrooms, we want our journalists not to be not biased, but not in the humanitarian aspect. We cannot be unbiased when we're telling the story of a human being. I can be unbiased when I'm talking about narratives of the warring parties. In spite of having this party here or there, I can zoom out and fact check my story. And if my story is credible and honest, then it could have its impact. And investigative journalism, above all, I believe that there is hope. 30 seconds. In the early phases, we spoke about expanding the margin. Those media outlets that could publish those investigative stories, they're interested in those stories. Investigative journalism for some is a headache, but it is a vitamin that could refresh those channels and make them attractive and allow them to gain audience and to have a prestigious position among their audience if they follow if they present good investigative journalism. If you give me other 30 seconds, I have a suggestion. We spoke about what we need or what was missing in ARIJ's agenda, which is the communication with editorial boards. I believe that in the future, this is a suggestion for ARIJ, that we should be in contact with editorial boards to convince them what the importance of investigative journalism, because ARIJ could provide consultancy and training, and it could provide the legal protection in case it is needed, and to persuade those editorial boards that investigative journalism works in their favor, and it gives them also financial wins. Maybe a part of the role that ARIJ, this is a part of ARIJ's role. There's a question that we got online. I want to make this question before we run out of time. It is related to social media. What is the role of social media? Or let me ask the question that Hanan Khairi made online. Does social media play a role in breaking boundaries over the work of journalists? Do you believe that social media is helping you break the boundaries? And this is a question for the entire panel.
Well, these help, but they are not also a magic solution, because they put the life of the journalist at risk, but they provide more space. This deserves a session in itself, but the social media, when they started, they helped in breaking the boundaries, but now they are posing another boundary on the journalists, the shadow banning, the logarithm. If, for example, the content doesn't or is not appealing to the owners of the company, they might do a campaign against you, and then you will be using your work. And this is also other than the content and the form of it, which are permitted in social media. Now, the journalists, instead of giving us all the evidence, they need to put it into 60 seconds because of the attention span. This is a boundary in itself. Victoria.
I agree with Doja. No, I fully agree with you. There is some limits related to social media, but what we've seen from the assistance desk is that for many journalists in exile, citizen journalists, young journalists, social media have been a way to rely and convey the information when the government were oppressing the official media. So I think they are a way to pushing boundaries, even obviously we have to be extremely careful about the ways they are being used.
أسعد بس كمان لأنه النقطة اللي هلا أشرت لها فيكتوريا إنه
Asad, also the point mentioned by Victoria that the authorities are monitoring the social media and are utilizing those in order to put pressure on the journalists. Yes, this is what I said. In my opinion, it provides a wider space for us to express our opinion, but anyone on the social media is under the surveillance of the authority and the platform itself. It is a double surveillance or monitoring. We know what is user-generated content. We can benefit in part of that as investigative journalists. And the point which I have mentioned is that we need to rely on the public sentiment. The social media contribute in creating that, and so I can utilize it in order to shed the light over my story and support my story in order to be able to produce it and publish it. Muna, I see that the social media, it's double-edged sword. It is it has a benefit in certain instances, but relying only on social media and receiving our news, or there are certain information that are not accurate, are not correct, the misinformation and disinformation which are published on the social media. And but we see that more and more people are relying on social media, which is publishing inaccurate information or this misinformation. And like Mr. Mustafa said, there is a lot of censorship on social media. Yes, I believe also this summarize all what we have discussing is that we need to do a fact checking of the information, the disinformation in the social media. There are many online questions, but there is one thing I would like to conclude with because the time is over. And it is a remark, not a question. No, it's not Mona. Someone that did not write his name, in order to limit the violation against the journalist in case there is a will and cooperation between the legal persons and the journalist in order to put the pressure on the authorities to respect the law. This is a hope more than a reality. And also based on what you have mentioned is that the cooperation of the journalists and providing support to each other will contribute in getting around, and maybe we can reach a stage whereby we can break the boundaries. Thank you so much to the panelists. We thank the audience that remained with us. And now we have reached the end of the session. And don't forget, at 8:30, we have the award distribution session, and hope to see you at 8:30.